Hello everyone and welcome back into the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast. And for our final segment of today's show, if you're a Man United fan, you may want to cover your ears for this one because we are assessing the state of your particular club, where they are right now, how they can get out of the mess they're in, and whether it can be any time soon. Let's start off with this season and why it is going to go down as the worst in Man United history. So obviously, with the acquisition of the club, in terms of the 27.7, I believe, percent stake with Ineos, there was a lot of hope and optimism that the Glazers would not have power over this team anymore and ruin it any further. Because that tenure was one of the worst, in my opinion, management of any club in world football. The Glazers truly left this club in a terrible spot, and now we're trying to see the ramifications of that. And so, while Ineos is a group that a lot of people believed would invest enough in revamping this Man United team, getting it back on track, getting it back to the club we all know can compete for Premier League titles, it's just in this purgatory of not being able to do anything. And yes, you can't necessarily not blame them either because they've made a lot of decisions thus far as the owners of Man United that have led them to this point as well. But you have to go back to then. Back to when United were under the Glazers and fans were really impertinent about their situation, to now where they might even be worse off. And now, if you're a Man United fan, you have to ask that question. Are Ineos really that much to blame just because of what the Glazers have left them? But then, let's look at what Ineos has done throughout this season that will not be looked on very brightly by Man United fans after their tenure, if it ends up not going that well. They, in the off-season, decided to keep Erik ten Hag, retain his services, really rely on him, however, didn't necessarily splash the cash in the summer. They didn't really invest in the squad enough. That left them very thin at the striker position, left them very thin at both the left and right back positions as well, and as a result, this squad was not up to Erik ten Hag's standards. But then, you look at Erik ten Hag and his tenure with United and think, well, yes, the squad is thin, but he really didn't implement much into the squad. Every single game they played under his tenure, there was no passion, there was no desire, there were no players who were willing to make a go of it. And that was why they fired him mid-season. Now, this is where it gets interesting. This is where I think the apex of the situation arises. Because Rube Amorim at Sporting was doing incredible. He had a marquee win over Manchester City in the Champions League at home. Victor Gyökeres was doing great things at the striker position, and he was looking like someone who was willing to go the distance that season with Sporting, potentially lead them to great things, not just in the Portuguese league, but maybe as a dark horse competitor in the Champions League. But Ineos was quick to pull the trigger on Erik ten Hag, and they immediately said Rube Amorim's the guy to take us back to the promised land. The problem for me is, if you're going to fire Erik ten Hag mid-season, and you're going to challenge Rube Amorim to come into that situation mid-season, try and implement his style of football, his system, why didn't you think about firing Erik ten Hag earlier when Rube Amorim was even more eager to take the job? That would have given him, at the very least, a summer to learn these players' habits, maybe for potentially Ineos to sign more players, and most importantly, to implement his tactical system. Because now, this system is proving too complicated for United. And without the proper pieces to implement it, this team is directionless. And it could be that way for a very long time, to the point where Amorim is at risk of getting sacked as well. And truly, that would be really, really disappointing for Man United. That would leave them very much in a hole that I don't believe they'll ever get out of. And yeah, Amorim hasn't necessarily proven that he can lead these players, inspire them. But if you're manager coming in mid-season to this moribund club, I wouldn't be able to fix the situation. Which leads me to my question. If you're a Man United fan, do you believe Amorim is the right fit, considering all that's gone on around him? And I would like to hear your opinions as well, but here is my opinion. As Matt Quinn enters the chat, my good friend from the GSMC. Hey Chris, I'm a Man United fan and nothing will change with the Glazers as the owners. Well, I truly believe that you are correct in that assessment, and I agree that the Glazers are a group that really left this Man United team better off, worse off for that matter, than where they would be had they just gotten rid of them as soon as the fans started voicing their disapproval. But now that Ineos is in, I feel like you can't really blame the Glazers that much in terms of Ineos' decision to retain Ten Hag and then bring in Rube Amorim. That decision, in my opinion, was clearly on Ineos. But I agree that if the Glazers had really been gone for several years, then that's when Ineos could have made more of an impact. So I agree that the Glazers were terrible owners, and perhaps the worst owners in that club's history, in this club's history for that matter. But I do think that Ineos has also kind of compounded the issue, if that makes sense. But Amorim is an interesting case because I think he has the right ideas. He has a system that could, in theory, work if he has the right players. But I'm starting to question if the current players have the desire to play for him anymore. And that's what matters, because you're not going to get players until the summer, and who knows if you'll still be there. So that's the big question about Amorim. I would like to give him the benefit of the doubt just because he was placed in this very uncompromising situation. But if, you can't get the approval of the most important aspects of this rebuild, the players, then I don't know how it's going to be. And then you transition to the system, and that's where the challenge to me comes in. Because the system, this 3-4-2-1 system that gets the most out of the wingbacks and really requires kind of a target man striker to finish off the chances that this team can create, is in theory very impactful. As Matt Quinn also says, yeah, I don't blame Amorim for most of this mess. And I agree. But this system, in order for it to work, does need certain players. In fact, I feel that United has a lot of players that could work in the Amorim system. For example, I'm not necessarily mad if Zirkzee becomes more of a hold-up player and he drops back a little bit deeper. I feel that could work a lot. It could impact Bruno's impact on, this whole lineup, but I feel that could work. But Højlund to me is not a clear out-and-out striker just yet. I think he's still maturing. And then if you go down the roster in this lineup, Dorgu is an interesting signing, but he's still only 20 years old. Dalot to me is someone who I actually really like and is a highly underappreciated right back, but him playing in technically a back five, if you can call it that, and being more advantage of the pitch leaves him very vulnerable for counterattacks. And then the mess that is the center back position, yeah, Harry Maguire's looked better with both Ten Hag and now Amorim but he's not going to be there in the long-term future. And then De Ligt really has been a pretty bad experiment coming over from Bayern. And I can tell you that as a Bayern fan, that could continue to happen. He's very injury prone as well, and I don't really know how he fits in to this Man United squad. Unless we say about Mazraoui, the better. But this is a team that right now doesn't really rely on the system, and as a result, you're starting to see all the players lose faith. And that's a very important factor, and that's the last thing I want to address. If these current players can't really play in the system, adjust to the system, then can Man United, and most importantly Ineos, analyze the players they want and bring them in and make sure they're the right fit for Amorim or maybe someone else if they decide to fire him, because that could be the case. I think that the fact that they failed to sign a guy like Gyökeres in the January transfer window says a lot about where they feel they stand, but they could try again in the summer. They could try and look for, more depth at the left back position, the center back positions even. Maybe another holding midfielder, because Ugarte even did not pan out, and Casemiro is another one of those players where the less said about him, the better. So ultimately, they're going to have to find the right players, sign them if they're willing to, and if Ineos is willing to splash the cash, then that's when I feel you can start to see more of this rebuild happen. But let me know what you continue to think. Thank you, my friend Matt, in the comments. Go check him out as he begins his career as the GSMC football podcast host over the next couple of months. But that will just about do it for my show, the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. I've been your host, Christopher Shepard. We'll be back tomorrow, as always, 2:55 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, but I'm out for today, and I will see you all tomorrow.